Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the More Than You See podcast, where I have meaningful conversations with creatives about their mental health journeys. Please note, I am not a licensed practitioner or therapist, but an actor and a filmmaker who's deeply interested in exploring my own struggles and the struggles of others. My hope is that these conversations bring you some joy, some personal understanding, and some tools so that you can build your own mental health toolbox. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. Surprise! This is actually the final episode of season 4, but don't worry, season 5 of the podcast will be returning in January, so you only have a few short weeks to wait. I wanted to make sure that I took a couple weeks off for a myriad of reasons, obviously, of course, because it's the holidays, but also because I think that it's super important to take this time to reflect and to sit in some reflections and meditations about like what has worked this year, what has not worked this year. And that's why I'm so excited about the guest that I have on today. Nadia is a singer and a songwriter who specifically focuses on what she calls pop positive music. So it's pop music that is focusing on mental health, but spinning it in a digestible light. She talks about how her mother's suicide was so impactful in her own life and in her own songwriting, and how she continues to spread joy and the focus on transparency and honesty in her music with her community and now with this community. I'm really, really excited to share this conversation with you all because I think that we touch on so many different things that are especially relevant as this year winds down. And I am really excited to digest this with you at the end of the episode. So stay tuned. And here is Nadia. Hi, Nadia. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm pretty good. I'm really excited to have you here. First of all, I want to do like a mental health check-in as far as like how you're actually doing. Every time someone's responded and been like, "I'm great" or "I'm good," I'm like, like give me the real down low. Like how are you actually doing? And I'll actually say as well, like I'm doing pretty good. I had a very stressful Thanksgiving actually, and for numerous reasons that I'm actually going to be talking about on the podcast in the future. But so I'm like actually forcing myself to rest for a couple days, which is very hard for me, but my body very much needs it. So I'm kind of just sitting in that right now.
Well, good for you for recognizing that that's something you need to tap into. I know it's not easy.
Yeah.
As a fellow workaholic, like it's very hard to just be like, okay, fine, I'll hit the pause button
Right.
until you're like forced to usually, but you know,
Right.
it's good you're doing it before that.
Yeah. So how are you
Intervention.
doing?
So I'm in a similar spot. I feel like I'm pausing on a lot of work stuff and I'm really, really focusing in on organizing my life to get out of kind of some survival mode mindsets that I feel like I've been creeping back into as this last year has gone on.
Yep.
Just trying to like optimize and organize and like streamline certain things so that way I can take more rest time. And slowing down has just helped my brain recognize like, oh, like this is just not the best way to be doing things anymore. So it's been stressful because it's a reflective time and you're looking back and you're like, oh my God, like how did I survive this last year with the way I've
Yeah.
been operating?
Yeah.
But so, you know, it's had its low moments, like looking back, but I feel optimistic coming into this like slow, restful season and then where it's gonna go.
That's awesome. This is perfect because surprise, you're actually going to be the last guest on the season for this season. We're going to be starting up again in January, but we're going to be taking a month off, which I'm very excited about. And I was excited for you to be the last guest in particular because I know that you focus on like having your own tools and like you do a lot of like deep work as far as like self-analysis and figuring out what the tools that you need in order to slow down, reset, analyze what's going well and what's not and all of those sorts of things, which I think is really super, super valuable. So I think that this is going to be just like a really wonderful way for people to kind of like wind down their year and then, you know, start this next year. And I think One of the things, like one of my pet peeves, actually last year on the podcast, I did a pet peeve episode about how I hate that everyone's like, new year, new me, because it's like, nope, same person. But I think the benefit is the fact that we are kind of forced to reflect and do what you are saying that you're doing, which you're like, what's working well, what's not, and then kind of optimize yourself for the future. So I'd love to hear more about that and like what's something that you have realized that is not optimal and you want to try and change that for the future.
So this last year, I feel like I kind of jumped the gun on certain projects. I went into things a little bit too warp speed. I was leaving the previous year where my boyfriend actually, he was in a head on collision and
Mhm.
everything stopped. Everything stopped because, when something like that happens, your universe, it just kind of ceases to move forward for a bit while the world continues to go at warp speed. And I
Right.
think coming out of that, I was like, oh my God, I have so much catching up to do. I need to just jump on this 120-mile-per-hour train and just hope for the best. And I think I kind of went into some releases and some projects just not the the best communication to my fans and to my audience. And I feel like I could have done better in being I could have communicated better if I had just been a little bit slower and taken the pause time
Mhm.
to really like sit with like what does this song actually mean to me? What can
Right.
it mean to my audience? And that's what I'm trying to do for this upcoming year is really just pause and like zero in on the plans. And I feel like I actually have a clearer roadmap because of this slowdown time.
Yeah.
And things are just making a lot more sense because we need it. We go into survival mode when we don't take it, and
Right.
when we're in survival mode, we just do not make the best decisions.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like you shouldn't buy a house, get married, move, like sell your car, whatever in those heightened times. And it's certainly something that like I had a couple weeks ago. And then I'm going to ask you about you and who you are and what you do and all those sorts of things because I feel like we just jumped past that because I was just excited to chat with you. But I had a couple weeks ago with all of the AI stuff in regards to the SAG-AFTRA contract where I had a full week where I was spiraling about like, why am I doing this career? And
Totally understandable, though.
yep, for sure. And it was one of those and it was definitely one of those things where I was like, I wanna move to Paris. Why am I in Los Angeles? Like one of those things, and my boyfriend gently reminded me that you don't make big life decisions in moments of crisis like this. But it was also very I did an episode about this because it was so interesting also for me to kind of analyze myself and be like, "Oh, man, I went from 0 to 1,000 so quickly when I started having emotional reactions to this," and kind of analyzing, like, why those emotional reactions were happening because I think that it's really, really important for us to have that self-awareness. Going back for a second, introduce yourself. What do you do? Who are you? Where are you located? All those things.
So I'm Nadia Vaeh, and I make pop rock music. I call it poptimistic-rock, being that I really try to imprint on all of the songs and all the visuals that I create just a thread of like hope, even in like the really dark songs. Like if you lean in, some of my songs are like about the saddest things, like grief and loss, but they're to like an upbeat, like skippity guitar drum pattern, and I
Yeah.
just want to make people feel good while they're feeling their feelings at the
Yep.
same time. I am based in Atlanta, Georgia right now, working on making my way to Nashville. And yeah, music is my passion. It's why I'm here on earth, and I love what I do.
That's awesome. How did you find it as your passion? Like how do you know that this is what you're supposed to do on earth?
I feel like my earliest memories involve music. Like,
Mm,
when the tape started for life on life for me, it was music. I was always, like, really musical as a kid, like, really drawn to melodies and rhythms and, like, even as, like, a little two-year-old. And then when I found writing and words, that's when I was like, "Oh my gosh, like, I can take what I feel and think and put it to a melody, like, what?" And that's when I was like, okay, this is what I want to do with my life.
Yeah.
And formed my first band and then ventured away from music due to mental health reasons and found my way back through life's, little side doors. And that's how I also was it was like a reaffirmation, like, okay, yeah, this is it.
Right. This is why I'm doing what I'm doing. And so how did your life or how did your music change with those 2 periods of your music?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would say it got gradually more honest. Like I
Mm.
got a lot more because I had this time away where I was lost and I was searching for answers in all the wrong things, right? And then once I made my way back to music, it was like a very different energy.
Mhm. Yeah. And so how do you keep yourself honest now when you're writing your music?
I would say back to those times of slowdown and those times of pause because the most real stuff gets created when you're out of that survival mode mindset. And what you were talking about earlier, where your boyfriend was like, wait, no, 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 we don't make those decisions when, we're in crisis. I feel like there is a great tendency to want to run
Mhm.
when things like that are going down. It's like, hold up, fight or flight, got to get the hell out of here. Trying to hit the pause button as much as possible and like ground in, which I'm a water sign. I'm a fire sign with a lot of water in my chart. I don't know if you're into astrology, but I like to nerd out on it sometimes.
Mhm.
Earth is hard. Earth is hard
Yep.
for me. I definitely find that that's what keeps me honest in my writing.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you mind talking a little bit about what you were struggling with as far as your mental health and then how your music kind of reintegrated back into your life after that?
So my mom passed away when I was 16, going on 17. She struggled with depression and anxiety pretty much as long as I can remember. And she lost her battle to depression that summer of my 17th birthday.
Mhm.
And just losing her in that way, I didn't know how to process or cope. And I think no matter how you lose a parent, it's hard. But then throw in the fact that you're going through puberty, like, and all the adults in your life are figuring out their own grief. It's like you're kind of on your own. I barely graduated high school.
Mhm.
I kind of did the whole running thing and I left home because it happened in our childhood home. I couch surfed, thankful to the gracious parents of kids who I grew up with that let me crash on their couches because I could have easily like wound up on the streets, like sold for, sex slavery or something crazy.
Yeah.
I don't, I went on that whole side street. And then from there I started bartending and, once I became of age, I went down that route. I started partying a lot, just really masking and hiding my feelings. I never really dealt with it until so many years later, right? And it was when I started to face it that I realized that something was very much missing. And I, by chance, found my way back into music. I met a circus ringmaster. Another whole, hiding from my emotions thing that I was doing a lot of was serial relationships that were unsuitable for me.
Yep.
And I was like never single, always had a boyfriend. I was leaving a relationship with somebody who wasn't really supportive of my creative side because I had just started to explore it again. I was like, oh, maybe I could actually like go back into music and this could be a thing. And he was like, no, like you're way too old to be in music. And I was like 22 at the time. I was like, okay, so I'm not 16, but like anyone can be creative, right? So from there, I was like, you know what, I need to move on and I need to find a way to make this happen. And I was in the process of moving out of that place with him. And I met a circus ringmaster and he invited me to come train and learn circus arts. It was super random and super weird. I was not necessarily meant for that. Like I didn't grow up doing gymnastics or anything, but I said yes. I was like, sure, I'll try this out. I learned hand-to-hand acrobatics and I was not good. I did like one show with them. But from there they like really liked my singing voice. So they had me perform vocally for their productions. And then
Awesome.
from there, I met my first songwriting partner and we started a folk project. And that's where I took the pen to paper and started writing again. And I was like, oh my God, like this is what's been missing. And I became obsessed, absolutely obsessed. So I started experimenting with different styles and I eventually found my way back to pop rock, which is what I'm doing now. And that's kind of where I started sonically in high school. And now that I'm in this kind of like pop rock style, it feels really authentic to me. And what's crazy is I finally, 16 years after my mom passed away, which I was 16 going on 17 when it happened,
Mm.
I finally wrote a song about it. And
Oh,
it's coming out in 2024.
that's amazing.
And it's one of those things, like, it's one of those events in life that it just takes a while to actually visit and write an honest depiction and, encapsulation of the feelings. It's called Rewind. It drops right before Mother's Day, a couple weeks before Mother's Day. And I performed it live recently, actually, at an acoustic performance at an acoustic show. And a woman came up to me after, and she also had lost her mother at around the same age.
Mm.
And she is a songwriter too. And she was like, "Oh, I've had such a hard time, writing about this." And I'm like, "Don't you worry. This one took me 16 years. It's just, you got to let it bake for as long as it needs to bake."
That's amazing. I'm really excited to share it with our listeners whenever it comes out. I want to talk about, experiencing that as a kid, because I think that my stepdad is bipolar. And that's certainly something that now as an adult, I recognize just different idiosyncrasies and different things that he did that I now directly tie to bipolar, because I know what it is and I've, learned about it and all those sorts of things. And of course, as a child, I had no context or understanding of that. I think that, like, with my partner's children, and if I were to have a child myself, I think that it would be really important for me to vocalize what different mental illnesses are, what different mental health disorders are. So that way there's some understanding and some context, because I think that we don't teach children enough about what goes on for adults, I think. I think it's important to, like, keep them in their imaginary worlds and protect them as much as possible. But I also think that there's so many things that are affecting them, whether we're talking to them about it or not. So I'm curious, two things. Number one, what are things that you've kind of unpacked for yourself, if you're willing to share, that you learned about, that experience growing up with your mom? And then also, if you were to have a child, how do you think you would handle it differently if that was, like, if you were going through, because we all go through, difficult times. Like, if you were going through a time that was really difficult, how would you communicate that to your potential child?
These are amazing questions. Like, I'm very big on unpacking and, just trying to understand the generational trauma that we all carry. And, as I've been writing these songs and, like, working through everything, like, I'm realizing that this is, like, from, like, generations. Like, my mom's mom, like, they had a very tough relationship, and that's transcended down into how she parented us. And my mom was the best mom. We had a great relationship.
Mhm.
When I entered my teen years, I realized my mom was very codependent on me for her own happiness.
Mm.
And I think that, when you lose somebody to suicide, you struggle with blaming yourself. You struggle, like, that's all part of the process.
Yes.
I think because I was a teenager and I was going through my angsty phase, like, that got a little bit amplified, where I was like, it's because I was bratty. Like, it's because I was this, like, enraged teenager that she did this thing. And it's like, no, it's mental illness. And it was, her own inability to actually regulate her emotion. To follow up with the second question, what would
Mhm.
I do differently with my kids? One thing that I love about TikTok is seeing these rad parents that are like, "Oh, yes, I taught my kid a new emotional regulation technique." Like,
Mm.
seeing those kinds of, like, really conscious parents out there, like, I'm like, "The future is actually gonna be okay." But I think that that's where I would wanna really empower my children, is like, "Okay, I'm gonna be open with them when mommy's having a bad mental health day, and explain, like, 'Hey, I'm sorry if my temper is a little bit short. Mommy's overtired.'" Or,
Mhm.
like, like, kind
Mhm.
of being open, because kids can understand, and they can. I really feel like if my mom had had the communication skills and the ability to actually understand what was really going on with herself, then she could have been a better communicator, and a lot of the traumas that I picked up, I wouldn't
Right.
have necessarily absorbed it the same way. And I think that that is directly related to that, our parents' generation's lack of conversation, like these podcasts. And that is why our generation is going to be the one to kind of break a lot of these isms.
Yeah. No, for sure. I think that it's interesting because you touched on a couple things like the blame that kids automatically feel whenever their parents having a bad reaction to something. And I think it's so important for us to teach kids that parents are separate, that we have our own emotions and we have to that we're regulating ourselves and like we have bad days and like one of the things that my one of my therapists told me at some point was like it's not about teaching children how to not fight. It's about or showing them how to not fight. It's showing them how to fight and still love each other and come through the end, like come through it. And I think that that's like so key where it's like we can have a disagreement and still have a conversation and still get upset with each other and still love each other at the end of the day. And like that is a healthy relationship. It's not just like, avoiding these difficult conversations. I think that's really, really important.
Right. And then, like, back to what we were talking about at the beginning, where it's like this tendency to run when things get like a little bit crazy. It's like
Yep.
that's that generational, like, oh, like things are tough. Like, let me just ignore it and it'll go away.
Yep.
Versus like facing it and wading through, and yeah, it's just
Yeah.
crazy.
So besides like this really important song about your mom, like how do you choose what you want to write about? Because I feel like, as an actor, so often parts of myself come up in characters that I'm playing because that's the nature of it, but, like, it's still at least when I'm acting, because I write as well, so when I'm writing, it's originating from me, but when I'm acting, it's still originating from someone else. But for you, it's like you're the origin, so how are you deciding what you wanna share and how you wanna put yourself into your songs?
Well, I think a lot of the songs that I write come from different life experiences, whether they're my own or just having a conversation like this.
Mhm.
It can spark an idea, and it's like, oh, that's something that I've heard lots of people struggle with. That, like, maybe if I tap into that like emotion, like there's something that I can some I mean there's something I can always grab onto and identify with enough to like speak on. But then a lot of it is also just like my own personal issues that I'm facing, like people pleasing. I have a song called Opposite Day coming out next year, and it's all about just struggling with like actually standing for what I want, and how I bend over backwards just to like make sure everyone's good. And I think that's something that a lot of people have struggled with. I'm
Especially
I'm working on it.
Yep.
Working on it. And, just I have another song called Trigger Warning, and it's just about kind of feeling like you're walking on eggshells, but you're realizing that you might be creating the eggshells.
Mm,
And that's just kind of from growing up around adults that were so emotionally dependent on you, which I think that's something that a lot of us carry around in the world.
yeah.
And, just like different mental health things end up coming up when I'm in writing sessions. And then sometimes I'll take an experience that's very specific and I'll make it very abstract. Um,
Hmm,
I have
interesting.
a holiday song. It's a very atypical holiday song coming out next week. And it was inspired by experiences in the music industry where it was like that whole casting couch vibe where I'd be working with an industry professional and then they'd be like, "Oh, well, I can buy you and make you my little, sugar baby dolly, and also I'll make money off of you while you write me songs," and that kind of thing. And it just like getting frustrated with that whole side of the industry that exists, unfortunately. And I wrote it about Santa Claus.
Mm,
And how and I was looking at the situation like, "Oh, yeah, like, they want like, these people, like, they want to help me with these, like they, like, will dangle carrots, right?
mhm.
But really, I wanna be in charge, and I wanna say what I wanna say," that kinda thing. So, I flipped the script, and I band together with Mrs. Claus, and we take over the North Pole.
That's
Mm.
awesome.
It's so silly.
That's really
Um,
cool.
but, yeah, just it varies it's all over the place when it comes to songwriting.
Yeah, but it seems a lot of like peanut butter with the medicine kinda songwriting where it's like, you are making, like, very important statements about the world, but just kind of like veiling them a little bit so that everyone wants to listen to them, which I'm like a huge proponent of and a huge fan of. And I think that that was like, one of the reasons that I started this podcast and everything is because I wanted people who aren't necessarily used to listening in some way or whatever, that they're like, "Oh, I can, still
Right.
get help."
Right,
And
it's digestible.
yeah, exactly, it's digestible. So do you make your living entirely from your songwriting at this point?
I wish, I
Oh,
wish.
yeah.
I have so many side hustles, it's very silly. I do a lot of different things, like watch dogs and cats, do a lot
Mhm.
of pet sitting. I love pet sitting because I can write songs while I'm doing it.
Ah,
Probably one of my favorite of the hustles. But I also do things like style for, like, corporate videos or other people's music videos. Like,
yeah.
this set design back here is for
Uh-huh.
I do a lot of that for my own music, and people
Okay.
started asking me like, "Oh, who does your set design?" I'm like, "Hire me."
Uh-huh.
Um, so just, like, random things that I've just fallen into to help, like, pay the bills, but I am lucky to be fully freelance.
That's awesome. And how do you, because I'm the same, and my biggest issue is finding value sometimes in my creative stuff that isn't bringing in money right now. Like, that's such a difficult thing to, like, put your time and attention into, and so I'm just curious, like, if you have any tricks or any things that you have done in order to remind yourself that, like, your voice is valuable, what you're doing is valuable, even if it's not bringing in income right now.
I totally resonate with that. It's tough. It's not easy.
Mhm.
And it goes in seasons. Like, there are some times where I'm like, "Oh, yeah, like, it's fine, like, it's gonna pay off," and then other times where it gets a little bleak and I'm just like, "Oh, like, why am I doing this? Why am I investing so much in?" But things that help keep me grounded in that I'll know, like, that knowing of, like, people do take value in this, and this does bring people the world good, right? And that's my community of people. I'd love to say I can generate it all myself, like, the whole, like, like, that inner knowing, but I do feel like when it gets really low and I kind of get to that bleak state of like, "Oh my gosh, why am I doing like, I put so much into this." Well, if I just tap back in with, like, my boyfriend who I actually get to make music with, he's very wonderful and, like, with the reminders of, like, the why. If
Mhm.
I for some reason, my brain goes on the dark tangents, he reminds me the why, and, you know, just like my community is always good in there for me in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure these, like, slow down times are helpful for that as well. So, do you have, like, a process, like, check-in process for yourself during this time where you're, like, kinda analyzing the past year and figuring out what you wanna do moving forward? Like, I know some people have, like, one of my closest friends, she's got, like, a list of, like, 12 questions that she goes through at the end of the year to ask herself, to make sure that those are, she's analyzing, every aspect of what went well and what didn't go well. Was that something that you kind of do, or do you just kind of, like, sit in it and let answers come to you?
It's more like taking an inventory. I love the idea of, like, 12 specific questions, though, and I'd love to get those from you guys if you
I will ask her for them, and I'll put them in the show notes for anyone who wants to listen, because she does have, like, they're really, really great questions, and it's something that I tell myself I'm gonna do every year, and I do, like, 3 of them, and I don't, but, like, I really,
right.
really should,
But they're
because
there and you
yeah,
talk to them and that's, like,
true.
3 is great.
Yeah,
Like,
thank you.
yeah. 'Cause, I mean, this time of year it does slow down, but it's also really hectic too, like, you're still balancing and navigating all the family stuff and the holiday expectations, and that's why I don't think I have a specific process per se, like, it's more just, like, sitting and taking inventory as I can,
Mhm,
and then adjusting, uh, as soon as I see a maybe a action item or thing that we've been doing that just doesn't work.
mhm.
Like, because I feel like taking action in the moment too is also really helpful when it comes to that kind of thing. Because it's very easy to just be like, "Oh, well, I'll just keep going that way," it's fine.
Yeah, that makes sense. And is there anything that you have reflected on so far that you're like, anything that you know so far that you're definitely gonna change for next year?
For next year, I'm definitely going into it way, way, way more prepared with a roadmap for the first 4 releases of the year. I already have
Mm,
very clear cut roadmaps of like the thesis statement of each song and like kind of what I really want to convey. And I also have created already some key content pieces around those songs.
Mhm.
So that way I can zero in on what's following up with those.
Yeah.
Because I am going to be releasing, which is something I've never done, a new song every 4 weeks. So it's a lot.
How do you or do you separate your songwriting self and your personal self, or are those two things very intertwined?
I'd say they're intertwined at times. I mean, like I said, the songs that I write, I do tend to tap in with like real experiences. I'm a very like I'm not a very social media personality type of person,
Yeah.
and I'm trying to get better at sharing like real life things that I do. Like, oh, I take care of these animals to pay my bills, and those kinds of behind the scenes things. I'm trying to like share more of like the real life, real day in the life in TV music behind the scenes,
Right.
in this next year. Because that's one thing too. I feel like people can feel like they know you through your songs, but there's like a whole, there's a whole. I'll never be able. It'll always be no more than 30% online, but I feel like you know showing that real is good every now and again.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to jump now to your college tour stuff that you were doing, which is so cool. And if you want to just explain a little bit about that, and then we'll go from there.
So in 2024, we are embarking on a little college tour. It's going to be called the My Face Hurts Tour. And I'm working on releasing a bunch of singles over this next year, over 2024, where they're going to be compiled all into an album called My Face Hurts. And the project really zeroes in on mental health and trauma and the importance of working through trauma through creativity.
Mhm.
And being a creative and being able to tap in artistically with these issues has honestly saved my life. My mom always struggled with mental health issues, anxiety, depression, and I'm a lot like her in that way. But I'm fortunate enough to have access to these creative outlets. And I feel like had my mom had the same, she would still be here. One of the key items that I like to talk with students about is generational trauma and how that transcends and how we move in the world and how we actually work on achieving our dreams and how we might self-sabotage those dreams. And I just feel like this world, it moves so fast and it can be so easy to disconnect from your authentic voice, and having creativity and hitting the slow down just enough to access that can make such a world of difference in just how your entire life looks. And I think like that college, I remember like being at that age, like I didn't have much access to creativity at that time. And had I had that in my tool belt, I feel like I would have avoided a lot of re-traumatization of my brain. And I think that it's going to be so wonderful to be able to share my experiences and some of the tools that I use to stay grounded in a very fast-paced world
Yeah.
with these kids. So I'm really excited.
Yeah, it's really, really cool. When you sent me information about it, I was like, this is really impactful and important. Why do you think, because we all have different ways of dealing with our mental health trauma and difficulties and all that kind of stuff, but like why in particular do you think dealing with things creatively is so effective?
I feel like if you look at, for example, I have a friend who works in the rehabilitation of women prisoners,
Mhm.
and she actually provides them with art therapy. And I believe the statistic, don't quote me, it's something crazy, like, but essentially, women who have access to some sort of art therapy or artistic expression are like 80% less likely to be reincarcerated.
Mm.
The reason I believe that's one reason, I mean, that statistic alone, but I really feel like creativity has a lot of power to just help us move through life with less pain because it helps us make sense of our emotions in a way that you can't necessarily just do by only talking about it or just sitting with them. There's something magical that happens when you are creative. It transmutes the feeling into something beautiful, and it helps manage the emotion to a state where you're not entering like a fight or flight or a fawn state of mind, you know? It's just so powerful.
I think for me also, it's that it forces you to do that slow down that we were talking about before,
Yeah.
because I think, like I did lots of art therapy when I was a kid, and that's still something that it's like when I just feel so much better. Like, I'm not really a painter. I can paint ish. And as soon as I paint, I just feel more relaxed in whatever state I was in before. It just feels better. And it's just one of those things where it just like forces you to, it's kind of like like what are you smelling? What are you touching? What are you hearing? What are you tasting? Like paying attention to all of your senses, which allows you to really like zero in on yourself. I think the same thing happens when you're being creative in some capacity, where it's just like zeroing in on whatever comes out of whatever comes out of your pen or whatever, and just allows you to just like, and also just to get back to like play and to get back to just like the innate part of who we are, and outside of that fight or flight, because I think that, you know, we think a lot about one of my day jobs is that I do marketing for a medical device company that specializes in wellness. Like it's really like an Eastern medicine kind of company, but there's a medical device associated with it. But it's really cool because something that they have really taught me is how much our fight or flight is just our baseline. Like us in the world now, we are constantly in a state of fight or flight, and not the way that we think. It's not like, oh, you almost got hit by a car. Now you're in fight or flight and you're like in a state of stress. Like, no, just walking outside is stressful. Our even just like being in a home, and this is a little woo woo, but being affected by like the Wi-Fi, signals that we're getting, like all of those sorts of things are impacting our brain all of the time when we don't even realize it. And I think that there's something so wonderful about being creative, because it kind of forces you to take a step back from all of that and just like zero in on whatever task that you're doing. I mean, it's the same as like if you're cooking for yourself. Like I consider that creative. Like it's not, and I think that that's a key thing in, and something that I hope that, you know, one of the things I really hope for this podcast is like, as I really focus on talking to creatives, I hope that people who like don't associate themselves as creative understand that they are creative, because it's like we all have aspects of our life that are creative, and it could be yoga, it could be, cooking and just like inventing something. Like there's so many different ways that we are just like embracing that sides of ourselves. But I think that sometimes we also then tie it immediately to commerce. So we're like, is this creative thing connected to commerce, which is not helpful. And, something that I've talked about in the past about like how you can have a passion that does not have to be something you make money from. Like it can just be something that you're passionate about, and that's enough.
So difficult to, as an artist who has chosen to make it a career. I
Yeah.
used to just love to craft and make jewelry, for example, and then I started making it my merch, you
Mhm.
know, and now it feels more like work when I sit down to do versus like an active meditation, like cooking or like, but, and that's, I think a really good point and something that to take a look at for myself anyway. Like, why do I always continue to try to monetize my enjoyment, like things that are just like kind of more passion
Yeah.
oriented? But back in the day, an artist used to be able to have like a patron
Mhm.
that would fund their career. It wasn't about monetization. It was about just creating and making sense of the times with art, right?
Right.
And unfortunately, times are very different, and
Right.
it's an adjustment, and that's why there's a lot of people walking around this earth that are like, I'm not creative. It's like, no, everyone's creative.
Yep.
Everyone is capable of being a creator.
Right.
Maybe your painting technique isn't like crazy, but it's something you can still tap into.
For sure. And I think, you know, like, being creative is privileged, like, being able to focus on our creative self is there's certainly an act of privilege there. At the same time, I think that it's important to recognize the fact that, like, our world is just getting harder to live in. Like, it is getting more expensive, it's just a difficult place to be, and so I think that for anyone who's listening and they're like, yeah, it's like it's a privilege thing, it's not something that I have time for, it's not something that, like, whatever. I think that it's like that thing where they say, like, if you say you don't have time to meditate, then you're the one who really needs to meditate. I think the same thing with creativity, where it's like, if you say that you don't have time to be creative, then, like, you really need to be creative, and, like, again, even if that's taking 5 minutes for yourself and doodling or, like, whatever. Like, we have all of these habits that are not necessarily serving ourselves as far as, like, watching TV at night or, whatever, but just taking a little bit of time to just, like, sit with yourself, like meditation is, like, so, so important, and I think one really benefit thing, bringing it back to, like, children and is that I think a lot of kids really see the benefit of that now. I think that people are, a lot of kids are, like, switching off, are not as interested in phones. They're, like, going away from social media. Like, they see the damaging aspect of that, and, like, they're becoming more excited to just, like, step away from technology a little bit, which I hope that continues. Like, I
Yeah.
hope, 'cause I think that that's just so key for us to remember that there is a world, an analog world out there and not digital, you know?
Play
Yeah.
outside, get dirty,
Right.
make mud
Exactly. Yeah,
pies.
exactly. It's so important. So I've got a couple well, actually, first I wanna ask you, so how are you choosing these schools, and how are you setting that up for
So
this?
we've been reaching out to I'm on the East Coast, right? We've
Mhm.
been reaching out to schools in Florida all the way up to Jersey. So we're just gonna kinda make our way up the coast. And at this point, I'm just hoping any school that will have me, I wanna
Yeah.
be speaking at. And yeah, it's kind of like my first real on the road tour. I've done some like small little legs, tri-state, you know,
Mhm.
you know. This will be my first real like on the road.
And will it be music or speaking or a little bit of both, or what's the
A little bit
form?
of both. So
Okay.
I'm bringing my band and we're gonna do like a hour live show and then an hour keynote speaking.
Oh, that's awesome.
And the show is very like surreal-esque. Like I bring these props that we made, like we painted to be like that comic book dot art. So it's
Mm,
like we're unfolding a comic book page basically on the stage.
so cool.
And I have an outfit that I'm working on with my friend Andrea that she's an amazing fashion designer that basically will look like that 2D comic book
Mm,
vibe.
that's really awesome. That's really cool. I hope that you share it on your social media, 'cause
Absolutely.
yes, we all want to experience it. So final few questions. First of all, like, say you said that you, like, really have built some tools for yourself as far as, like, to help self-regulate and to have self-awareness and to just kind of go through go through the world. I was gonna say go through difficult times, but it's also just, like, go through life. And I was wondering if you would share any of those with us.
So one of my go-tos is just going outside and putting I know it's woo-woo, but I'm with you on the woo-woo, okay? Like totally 100% there. I like to go outside and put my feet on the grass and stand or sit there for 20 minutes and just be. Like I don't
Mhm.
take my phone with me, no Wi-Fi, or EMF radiation, and I also really believe in the power of physical activity when I'm dealing with anxiety issues. And I really, really love to hike for that. I don't I used to do the gym, but I just feel like I never got like the same results as just going out and being in the trees, hiking and getting breathless. I also have gotten really into nutrition. I work with an acupuncturist occasionally that is a Chinese medicine lady and an herbalist, and she's kind of helped me find some things that have helped my gut health, which I realized was a lot of my anxiety attack causing a lot of my anxiety attacks.
That's
And
interesting. So it is, I mean, because the gut is the root of our immune system, so it totally makes sense. But how was that how was that coming up for you as far as, like, how did you able to tie your anxiety to your gut?
so I was noticing that my anxiety always started right here in my like sacral chakra.
Mhm.
I was like, I mean, that makes sense, right? Because fight or flight, butterflies in your belly, like that
Right.
whole. I was like, okay. And thinking back, I was like, every time I've had a surge of anxiety, it'll start there, and then it'll make its way through my lower half of my body, and then up into the chest. And I decided to see an acupuncturist after visiting my boyfriend's family in Illinois. Randomly, he was getting a chiropractic adjustment at his family's chiropractor, and they have this little lady named Dr. E who does acupuncture. And she's
Mhm.
like, "You want to try acupuncture?" So I tried it, and it was really interesting how calm I felt, how much better I slept that night. So I found a Chinese medicine lady here in Atlanta who, like, literally from China, like, is certified in herbalism and nutrition, and she basically did an assessment of my blood flow and my tongue,
Mhm.
and she talked to me about the different meridian points that our body has that govern, you know, various parts of our body, and she was like, "Yeah, your processing system, like, that processes food is out of whack. It needs to be like, my chi was off,
Yeah.
essentially."
Yep.
So, she did a lot of work with me through cupping and acupuncture on that, and it works. Like, it really works. Then she put me on some herbs that has helped me process food better because my body just doesn't process certain foods very well. Probably from being on antibiotics as a kid. Antibiotics are terrible for you.
Mm.
And now I'm getting more nutrition absorption because my gut is working.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So, definitely recommend, like, getting an assessment of what's going on with your body and processing food, and if anything's going on at all, try to look at it and work on it because it could be partially a big part of what's going on for anxiety.
For sure.
And then I also really find writing to be helpful.
Yeah.
Writing, just stream of consciousness, like whether I'm writing a song or just like dumping about my day.
Yeah. That's awesome. What would you say is your, like, your goal with your voice? And I don't mean like your singing voice, but like your emotional, just like who you are as a person, that kind of voice. What is your goal?
I hope to make people feel less alone, and I hope to make people feel more empowered to change their circumstance and their frame of mind.
Mhm. Beautiful. And then final question is, what is something that you're still working on for yourself?
I would say that inner critic, I'm trying to change her tone a little bit, trying to work with her to be a lot kinder.
Mm, yeah, that's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being here. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast to talk with you.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to share your songs with everyone. So it's gonna be a joy to continue to spread as you continue to put out those songs. And congratulations for doing that. That's such a big feat, and I'm sure you'll kill it.
Thank you. I can't wait to see the podcast continue to grow. And if I can support in any way other than sharing and engaging with content, like, please let me know.
Thank
And
you.
I'd love to keep in touch. If you're
Yeah,
ever on the East Coast, hit me up, and would love to
absolutely.
maybe grab a coffee in LA.
Yeah, definitely. Sounds good. Thanks again so much, Nadia, for being here with us. I really, really enjoyed our conversation, and you certainly gave me some things to think about and to try and pay attention to as I go into this month of reflection and a break before we start the podcast up again in January. So, as I said in the beginning, this podcast will be starting again. Season 5 will be starting again in January, but I just wanted to give everyone a little bit of a break, myself included, to have some time to sit and reflect on what is working, what is not working. And that's why earlier in the episode, we talked about some different questions you can ask yourself to reflect and just like analyze your year. And I'm going to make sure to put those in the show notes. So if you want to digest those questions and share them, that would be awesome. If you don't want to share them, that's fine too. That might be something that I try to do more publicly with you all and share my answers to you, the community. I want to thank everyone so much who has listened this year or to this season. It's been it's been a difficult year for a lot of us for so many reasons, and for me for some reasons that I'm actually contemplating sharing with you all in season 5. There's been some things that have been going on. I'm fine, but there's been some things that have been going on that I have felt would be really valuable to share with the community, and that's something that I plan on diving into more in season 5. I just think that the more that we can be honest with each other, myself included, the more that we can feel a little less alone and can kind of give voice and give light to some really important topics and conversations. So, again, thank you for being part of this community. Please share this podcast with anyone who you think might be interested. As well, if you have any feedback for me or for the podcast, please reach out to me on Instagram. I am always open to suggestions, ideas. This podcast I created for you all. And so I want to make sure that I am serving the community as much as I'm serving myself, because I know that I always learn something, feel better after talking to these incredible guests. But I want to make sure that I'm also giving back to the community and supporting you all as well. So please let me know what I can do to support you as we go into this holiday season and as we start the new year. Please remember to be kind to yourself, and that you and everyone around you is more than you see. Thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you again in a few weeks.